Welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, every Friday night, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, and simulcast on CJ Mars Radio and 365 Live and hazyradio.com. Then we are rebroadcast on the week, throughout the week, on wakeradio.us and wakeradio.uk and Shake and Wake with Rick and Annie, Firehorse Radio with Gene Chip Tatum, and Penny Entertainment on blogspot.com on Saturday mornings. I'm not sure if it's around 10 I'm not sure if it's 7 a.m. or 10 a.m., but it's in the morning. And we just started with them, and we had a lot of response from them last week, by the way. So I want to welcome everybody from Penny Entertainment on Blogspot Radio. Thanks for joining up. And we're going to be going on soon on WTRU Radio. And WTRU Radio is going to be on iHeart as well. Tonight we have a show that's really close, personal kind of show for me. We're going to have Bill Scott, who's the father of Erik Scott, who's the young man, a West Point graduate, that was murdered here by Las Vegas Metro Police Department in Costco a couple of years back. And then the whole thing was covered up by the police department. And there was a sham of this hearing put on that was just makes you want to puke, okay? And we'll be getting into that in a second. I want to remind everybody that it's a listener-sponsored station. So if you like what you're hearing, please go to freedomslips.com and click on the donate button. Coming up, we got Ward Churchill. We're going to be talking about the Baader-Meinhof gang and the Red Army faction and COINTELPRO. We got Bobby Seale from the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense coming up. And also, too, I think I might be having, I'm not going to talk about it till we're sure about it, what we have coming up. But let's get started right away with our guest tonight, Bill Scott. Bill, are you there?
Yes, right here, Ed. Thanks for having me.
No, man, thank you very much for coming on. And like I said, you have my condolences and my prayers for what happened, the injustice that happened to your son.
Thank you.
Yeah, can you tell us about yourself and your book, The Permit, and your career as a test pilot and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. First of all, who am I? I like to think of myself as, first and foremost, a husband and a father. That's the most important job I have. And beyond that, for my career, I was an electrical engineer. I was an Air Force officer. Went to the Air Force Test Pilot School, but as a flight test engineer. Just a quick correction, I was not a test pilot. I was a flight test engineer, so that means I sat in the back seat. Test pilot did the stick movement. I directed the tests in the air, acted as the on-site quality control, if you will, and then did a lot of the data reduction stuff. So worked with the pilots as a team. Did that for about 12 years. Had some exciting moments there. And then I went to work for Aviation Week magazine. Aviation Week Space Technology is the aerospace Bible of the world, weekly magazine. And the technical background plus the testing that I had done and a love of writing kind of all came together with Aviation Week. And I stayed there for 22 years, retired in 2007, been writing books since that time. So I have 3 books that were co-written with other authors. And then the newest one you mentioned is The Permit. And that's what some people are calling faction. So it's a lot of the facts related to Erik's murder and the cover-up that ensued. But it's wrapped in a techno-thriller story. So the bad guys get whacked in the end. And the short version, Ed, if you will, is what we call the pitch, is about the permit. Is when Las Vegas cops gun down a covert federal agent, they become targets for Checkmate. That's a black ops team of assassins charged with neutralizing terrorists. So using advanced high-tech weapons, Checkmate sends a loud and clear deadly message to outlaw killer cops. You kill, you lie, you die.
And that book, The Permit, that's available up on Amazon.com, right?
Yes, it is, both in hard copy and as an ebook.
Yeah, and you got The Permit blogspot.com as well that has all your upcoming stuff and things.
Yes, because of legal things going on at the time,
Yeah.
It was important that we shape some perceptions out there in Las Vegas. So I serialized the permit online. I put up a new chapter every single week on that Blogspot site you mentioned. And once it was all done, that was basically the first draft. Then my publisher said, okay, let's yank it offline. And I tightened it up, chopped out 15,000 characters, and we went to press. So it's been out there in hard copy, a little over a year, about a year and a half as an ebook. Seems to be doing quite well. And
Okay.
it's accomplishing kind of what I wanted too, which is it's not just about Erik, but it highlights what I firmly believe, and I'd be interested in your take on it. But nowadays, not all cops, but rogue and outlaw cops are killing people at an unbelievable rate here in America. And we can back it up with some statistics, but I consider a lot of these rogue and outlaw cops as nothing more than some of our most dangerous domestic terrorists these days.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. It just seems like, because I guess you're a little bit older than me. I'm 53 years old.
Yep, I'm 67.
Well, you're a little bit older, okay? So, and you and me growing up, it was a different world. And it just seems like now that the cops are out of control, and what went on just recently down in Ferguson. By the way, in the second in the after show, we're going to have Mike Bluehair, who's part of a group called Film the Police. He's going to be coming on and talking about his program of giving out cameras to civilians to film police activity and trying to with some kind of self-defense that we can get here of what's going on. Oh, brother.
And that's a great weapon. So I would suggest that filming cops is one of the most powerful, effective ways we can reduce killings / murders by cops. There's one quick data point. When Rialto, California forced their cops to start wearing body cameras,
right,
that reduced the number of complaints filed against officers by 88%, but it also dropped the number of use of force incidents by 60%. So it was a win-win. It's good for cops as well as, stopping the killing.
Yeah, it would seem like a simple solution, So why don't you tell us about your son, Erik? Let us get to know Erik, what he was like growing up as a son, as a West Point grad, his career, his work, and then we'll get into that tragic day at Costco.
You bet. Erik was our firstborn. We have two sons. And he was born into a military family. I was in the Air Force at the time, so we moved around a bit. But he was a very bright child from very early on. He walked early. He spoke in full sentences very early, by 18 months roughly. And he just was an enthusiastic, living life to the fullest kid, ornery at times. He was the quintessential redhead. He only had two speeds, running or asleep, and that was it. But, my wife was a teacher at the time. She really understood kids, and we were able to channel that energy into some very effective directions, if you will. So he played sports in high school, and he graduated from a Catholic high school of, 500-600 kids. And he was the scholar athlete, which that award went to those who combined excellence in academics with excellence in sports. Well, back in the 8th grade, he and a friend, Jeremy, were both in what we call a GATE class in those days, a gifted and talented education. And in that class, there was a section on military academies. And at that time, he and Jeremy made the decision, we want to go to West Point. So believe me, Ed, I used that as a hammer all the way through high school in terms of helping to keep that boy in line. And it worked. He got several appointments, went to the academy, and he thrived there. I mean, I can't say there's a lot of people really enjoy West Point or any of the other military academies, but he literally thrived there. It was good for him all the way around. He graduated in the top 25% of his class, had several top assignments in the cadet corps, so he was a high-ranking cadet officer, if you will. And he inherited his old man's eyes, so he could not be a pilot. He really wanted to fly helicopters. But he had majored in Spanish with a minor in systems engineering. And he was able to then branch, they call it, into armor. So he became a tank platoon leader, M1A2 tanks. And again, he thrived there. His guys loved him. He really enjoyed leading a platoon of tanks, was very successful. And in some of the exercises, he showed such initiative, and without the details of it, his tanks were taking hits from the opposition out at Fort Irwin. So it's all basically a big laser tag game. And as soon as he realized there was a helicopter popping up behind a hill and lasing his tanks, he directed several of the tanks to turn their big guns, the big giant guns on those tanks. And he said, on my command, and as soon as that helicopter popped up, he said, fire. Well, the instructors that were monitoring had never seen anything like that. So they awarded him an Army Achievement Medal as a result of that. But that was the way he operated. Everything from doing that sort of out-of-the-box thinking to when it was time to change a tread or fix something on the tank, his guys would say, hey, LT, we need your muscles, because the guy lived in the gym. He was a, very strong, muscular guy. So he never hesitated to get on the end of a wrench and help fix the tank, too. Anyway, he had a very successful Army career, but in essence, he was recruited out during a time, during the Clinton administration, when there was a drastic drawdown of the military. So the third time the Army offered Erik's entire West Point class an early out, he took it and went into the medical sales field. And
right.
He did quite well there. And that's what brought him to Las Vegas around 2000. And he was working for Boston Scientific at the time.
But let me ask you a question. In the military, he never actually saw real combat.
No, he did not.
Okay.
Which bugged him to no end. He was at West Point during the first Gulf War, and he was out before the second Gulf War. But he was so dyed-in-the-wool Army, Ed, that we used to say he was the only kid in the neighborhood that had camouflage diapers.
Yeah, right. And he was a really good-looking kid, too, right? He must have had a lot of girlfriends and stuff growing up.
He did.
Yeah.
The girls loved him, and he took advantage of that because he never hesitated to, or he never had trouble getting a date. Let's put it that way.
Gotcha.
And because he was fluent in Spanish, his whole cadet Spanish class went to Mexico one summer. That was their duty. And being redheaded gringo, he had a lot of fun because the girls would admire him and talk about him, and having no idea he spoke fluent Spanish. So had a good time.
Yeah, I could imagine.
He never quite got the wife thing right. He was married twice, and there was just a lot of reasons behind that. But nevertheless, he was a very successful guy in business there in Vegas. As I said, he was in medical sales, and when the boom took off, he went out and got his commercial real estate license. So for a while, he was doing both. He was working in the commercial real estate field as well as medical sales. At some point, he decided to get a master's in business administration. So he jumped in the Duke University cross-continent program, worked diligently while working full-time on that, got his MBA in 2003, I believe it was, and which really helped him in the commercial real estate field. If you know where the twin Queens Ridge towers are, what are they called? Yeah, Queen Ridge Place. not far, just kind of across the street from the Sunset Casino there. Well, Erik was the sales manager for the sale of all of those condos there, and every condo went for $1 million up. So he headed a sales team until they, all of those units were sold, and he lived there for a while. But when the economy crashed, he was pretty overextended. He had bought a number of houses, and things got tight there when everybody went underwater there. So I said, wow, so much for your real estate career. What are you going to do now, son? Typical Erik, always optimistic. He said, hey, I'm going to get a haircut, go get a new suit, go look for a job. Well, Boston Scientific eagerly hired him back, this time into their pacemaker division, which, he was on track to make $300,000 a year with that. And he was still kind of wrapping up some of the early training when he was killed in 2010. So always on the fast track, very successful, and, pretty much driven all the way through. And he had a charisma that we really saw people testify about, if you will, in testimonials, if you will, during his memorial service, which was on the 17th of July, 2010. We had to change the venue for the memorial service 3 times because we had no idea so many people would show up. It wound up being at the Las Vegas Country Club just because the people that helped set it all up said, we need more space. So there was, 250, 300 people showed up. And during the part of the service where people could get up and speak about him, there were, people we didn't even know would stand up and say, this is what Erik Scott did for me. So it was people from, a high school friend who was kind of at loss, at loose ends, sort of drifting, and Erik said, hey, you need to get in the Army. So he did. He was very successful there, Special Forces, and then he became part of the old guard, the people that, guard the tomb of the unknown soldier. When that boy got out, again, a little bit of loss. Erik said, you got to get a degree. Erik sat down with him, mapped out a plan, got a degree. Well, that story was told over and over. Orderlies that Erik would bump into in hospitals when Erik was going there as a sales rep for Boston Scientific. One of those came forward and said, Erik was the guy that changed my life. He was the one that urged me, why don't you go become a nurse? You don't have to be an orderly the rest of your life. And the guy did. So anyway, Erik was very influential that way in ways that we as his parents didn't even know about over the years. But because of that charisma, because of his driven nature, the fact that priorities in his life really centered around 3 things: education, physical fitness, and military service. He was a real patriot. Anyway, over to you real quick, Ted. That's
my
the
God.
concept of our son, Erik.
Yeah, I did not know that he had an MBA. I knew about the pharmacology sales. I knew about the West Point grad. I knew he was a fitness guy. You could just see that by looking at him. But I didn't know about the MBA. That's very impressive. Now, a quick question before we get into the day at Costco. Was his girlfriend able to make it to the memorial? Because I know she was probably run out of town.
No, she was there. She sat right beside me. There are pictures of her crying there, me with my arm around her, that sort of thing.
Right.
She didn't speak. She wasn't up to it at the time. But, Samantha was with him when he was killed. And, yes, she was close to her family for some time. She's kind of off doing her own thing now.
Right. Okay, well, why don't you tell us about what happened that day at Costco?
Okay. And for your listeners, the details are in the book, so I'm going to just kind of give you the top-level version. Erik and his girlfriend decided they needed to go to Costco and basically equip Erik's kitchen. She was going to have her brother and wife over that night for dinner, and she said, hey, you have nothing to cook with. So off to Costco they go. Erik was not a member. She wasn't either. So that day he bought the executive membership there. They go in. They're starting to fill up a shopping cart, one end of the store to the other. excuse me, this is very important, Ed, and it'll become apparent later. Before they got in the store, which is roughly around 11:30 to noon on July 10th, that's a Saturday, there was another guy in the store whose name I know. I have a copy of his driver's license. I don't reveal his name because I don't want him harassed by Metro, Las Vegas Metro.
Right.
But he was under the influence. He was accompanied by a significant other who was shorter than him, had on a white top, long dark hair, and Hispanic looking. That's important. But for whatever reason, this guy caused a disturbance back at the pharmacy. All right. Later, when Erik came into the store, this guy was either in the store or he had just left. But the resemblance between the two was unbelievable. I've got all the figures right on this guy's driver's license.
Yeah, I know what you're getting at because I know they had testimony about that guy knocking over a stand or something like that and saying, "I never should have came out today. I'm so effed up."
Yeah, but they said that was Erik.
Right, and it just seems so. But, they had to know by that point, and they just threw it in anyway, because we'll get into the whole thing about the hearing. The hearing was a circus.
Yeah, that was an inquest hearing.
Yeah.
But anyway, that stuff happened, and then Erik was in the store, and he was carrying a concealed weapon, which he had the legal authority to do it. He had a permit, which has a lot to do with the reason I entitled the book that way. But there's absolutely no signs on the outside of any Costco store banning weapons in the store. And Erik was very alert to that because a lot of the hospitals that he went into as a Boston Scientific pacemaker rep, they say right on the door, no firearms, no weapons allowed in here. So He routinely left it in the car. That particular day, they were in a borrowed vehicle that his girlfriend had. So he did not leave it in the vehicle. He carried it with him. And you say, well, why would you bother carrying it into a Costco? Because Erik was always on duty. As a Boston Scientific rep, he could get a call, much like a doctor, to go service the pacemaker for any patient in town there that had a Boston Scientific pacemaker. So he would take $30,000 worth of equipment into sometimes rough areas of Vegas day or night, around the clock. So all the pacemaker reps routinely carried a concealed weapon. They were all licensed to do so. So that's why he had it that day and in the store. Okay, well, at some point, he squatted on the floor while his girlfriend went around the corner to grab something else. Erik squatted down because, being the fitness guy, he didn't want Samantha, his girlfriend, drinking water there in the summer out of plastic because it, gets warm, cooks out carcinogens. He said, I want these stainless steel bottles for her. And he was checking to see if 3 of them would fit into a soft-sided chill cooler, okay? So he's squatting on the floor, opened the packages, made sure 3 of them would go in there. When he squatted down, his T-shirt rode up enough to where his weapon became visible. Somebody saw it, reported it, and a manager came over and talked to him and said, hey, firearms aren't allowed in the store. So we don't know exactly what was said, but based on witnesses, it was fairly congenial. There was no altercation going on, and we know that towards the end of it, Erik said, hey, we'll be out of here in a short time. Nobody ever asked him to leave. That's important. Samantha came back around the corner, saw Erik and this manager talking. Everything was very cordial again. Erik said, sir, would you mind do I need to put these bottles back in the box? No, just put the empty box on top, and tell them I check out. The bottles are in the cooler. So it was good. The manager evidently told Shay Lyerly, this little undercover security guy for Costco, that he had talked to Erik. Now, what exactly was said, we don't know. But Vince, the manager, left. For whatever reason, Shay Lyerly called the cops.
That's the guy that he was from Alaska. He had warrants out of Alaska.
That's right.
Right. And this guy lied on the 911 tape about his own military background.
Yep.
Yeah.
Shea Larley was a piece of work.
Oh my God. That's the guy who started the whole thing.
He did. And then, I mean, we have the calls, or the recording of the call. People say it was a 911 call. It was a 311 call.
Right.
But he and the call taker for Las Vegas Metro PD, they basically escalated the situation. She, the call taker, said, well, you think it could be ED, whatever that is, excited delirium? And Shay said, whoa, yeah, maybe it could. He's acting kind of strange. He's kind of red in the face. Well, hell, it was 100 and some degrees outside, and Erik's a redhead. Okay? And the whole point is, once he called this in, he and the call taker basically gave the impression there was some crazy, out-of-control guy in the store with a gun. Okay.
Yeah. Now,
did Shea Larley mix up Mr. Double that caused the disturbance down at the pharmacy with Erik? And he said, hey, the guy that was acting crazy earlier in the day, it's the same guy with the gun. Well, it could be mistaken because they, their height, their weight, their hair color, their eyes color, very close, very close. So either he made a mistake, or after the fact, after the killing, he said, oh my God, wasn't that guy. Now what do we do? Well, let's put them all together, So the guy who was acting crazy and under the influence of something became Erik, So anyway, at that time, cops were rolling towards the store. There was a female lieutenant that said, evacuate the store, but don't tell the patrons what's going on. So Costco employees walked around and said, hey, we have to evacuate the store, but they wouldn't tell anybody why. Samantha found Erik, who had gone for a second basket, and as he was walking back in, he was texting somebody. So he was anything but out of control. He was texting somebody, for crying out loud. And she said, hey, Erik, they're evacuating the store. They are? Yep, let's go. So they walked out with everybody else. Unbeknownst to them, Shea Larley was right at Samantha's elbow. He was still on the phone talking to the call taker at Metro. And as they walked out the door, Erik was about 2 steps ahead of Samantha just because of the crowd. They walked right past a cop, Officer William Mosier, Bill Mosier, who was standing at the entrance, his .45 drawn, muzzled down, and he still had on his sunglasses, and he was sweating like the proverbial. He was shaking like crazy, according to a lot of witnesses that we have on the record. Shea Larley points to Erik and says, that's him. And Mosier panicked because Erik had already walked past him. Mosier spun around, pointed his .45 at Erik, and started screaming. Erik had to stop, turn 180 degrees, and he sees this fat cop screaming at him. Okay.
Yeah, let me interrupt you for a second, because people should know that this cop he's talking about, Mosier, is kind of famous now because they've taken his picture of him testifying. He's the cop sitting in the witness stand, pointing his finger like a gun, like contorting his mouth to the side, like he's talking out of the side of his mouth, and he looks like Curly from the Three Stooges. And they've taken his picture and created this meme, and it's played over Facebook constantly, over and over and over again. People think it's some kind of caricature or a TV show, but this is the murderer that we're talking about in real life. And I have the picture up on my Facebook and on the Opperman Report blog, a picture of this cop, Mosier. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, it's important when you're talking about Mosier to realize that in his first 5 years in Las Vegas Metro Force, he shot 3 people, killed 2 of them, including Erik.
Yeah.
So who is this guy? He's a former Marine, by his own testimony at the inquest hearing, got out of the Marines and became a prison guard in Massachusetts. Then he came to Vegas, for what reason, I don't know, became one of the casino security guards. And then in the mid-2000s, when Las Vegas was going crazy, growing madly, he was one of the roughly 600 cops that were hired by Las Vegas Metro. Have it on firsthand authority that when Mosier went through the academy there, his training officers strongly recommended Mosier not be allowed to graduate because he was not police officer material.
Wow.
However, there was so much growth going on that the tower, they call the tower the head of, the top levels of officials at Las Vegas Metro, they said, we got to have boots on the ground on the street, let him go through. Well, they let him go through. He killed 2 people, including my superb son, in the first 5 years on the force. He is an exception. He qualifies as a rogue/outlaw cop in many, many books. Okay, back to what happened. Erik turns.
Well, you know what? We're going to have to take a break in a second, but let me ask a quick question. Is Mosier still a police officer? Is he still a cop now?
Yes, he is. And he's still abusing people on a regular basis. Feedback I get.
So he's still in Vegas. He's still a cop in Vegas.
That's right. Certainly is.
Okay. We're here tonight with Bill Scott, who's the father of Erik Scott. Erik Scott was an outstanding guy, a West Point graduate. That's no simple feat to become a West Point graduate. I knew another guy that graduated West Point, and his parents were the president of Guatemala. Okay, so these are the kind of people who graduate West Point. They go on to big positions in life. He was also an MBA graduate, master's in business. Bill Scott's the author of the book The Permit, and he has a blog spot too called The Permit. And you can find his book, The Permit, on the Opperman Report blog, and also up on Amazon.com, and there's over in Barnes & Noble. So anyway, I have to read some live ads here. A friend of mine, Jessica Styron Jacobson. That's Jessica Styron, STYRON-Jacobson. She has a GoFundMe campaign going on, and it's called Struggling Mom of 4 in Need. Jessica's an old friend of mine. I met her at first a few years back. She applied for a job with me. We became friends. And she has the 4 most beautiful kids you've ever seen in your life. She posts pictures of these kids. They're always camping and doing all kinds of fun stuff, always with big, giant smiles on their faces. Her son is all kinds of achievement awards. Anyway, so Jessica's on hard times. She's going through a divorce and a custody thing. She has a great apartment for these kids, but they pretty much had to leave with the clothes on their back. So they need everything, okay? They need furniture, they need clothing, they need financial support. So you can go to GoFundMe.com and look for Struggling Mom of 4 in Need by Jessica Styron Jacobson. And there's a link to that GoFundMe on the Opperman Report blog. Okay, everybody knows Pacific West Bamboo. That's a good old Amanda at Pacific West Bamboo, 503-839-8126. Her email is demroots@oppermail.com. And her Facebook page is Pacific West Bamboo. They're your number one source for timber construction and craft-grade bamboo poles, plants, products. They specialize in eco-friendly reclaimed wood products for the home and garden. They're located in Portland, Oregon, and they're servicing the Northwest for over 10 years. They can be reached at 503-839-8126. They can and do ship nationwide. She has all kinds of bamboo. She's like a bamboo merchant dealer, okay, but she's also going to make beer with bamboo. She's going to be selling the beer. She's going to make bicycles out of bamboo, concert stages, all kinds of projects in the works. So if you have a project, any kind of building construction project, get a hold of Amanda over at Pacific West Bamboo, 503-839-8126. Good old Mike Gray, infinityhomeplans.com. Mike Gray emails me about 20 times a day. Did you know that? He sends you all these YouTube videos and all this kind of crazy stuff in comments. So keep him busy. We need to keep Mike Gray busy designing and home plans, okay? infinityhomeplans.com. Please get on the phone with this guy and keep him busy. Check out Infinity Home Plans and Design Services, your resource for 3D and 2D design services. They offer a multitude of products, including stock home plans, 2D digital drawing sets, 3D models, renderings, and more. That's Mike Gray over at infinityhomeplans.com. Everybody knows Mike Gray. He calls in a lot of times to the after show. Emailrevealer.com. Okay. Hey, if you got any kind of, you need computer forensics, a cell phone forensic, let's say you think your husband's cheating on you, you send us a cell phone. We can recover the deleted text messages out of there, deleted pictures. We can trace his email address back to online dating services, all kinds of services at emailrevealer.com. Locates, asset search reports, background checks, anything you need. Okay, and the New World Mexican Women. They've written a book called New World Mexican Women. It's from a large state in Mexico called Guerrero. And these women have written this book. It's a two-part book. It's like a coffee table book. The first part of this book covers their love letters to their men back in Mexico, in the United States. The men have left this state in Mexico. They've come to the United States to find work, to send money back to their families. So the women back there wrote these love letters to these men, pretty much begging them to come back and stuff like that. The second part of the book is how to make authentic Mexican jewelry. Really cool stuff. And the book is it's available on Lulu. And there's a link on the Opperman Report blog. But we're here tonight. Don't forget, Revolution Radio is a listener-sponsored station. So if you like what you're hearing, go to freedomslips.com and click on the donate button. And we are here tonight with Bill Scott, author of the book The Permit, which is available on Amazon. There's a link on the Opperman Report blog. And he's the father of lost his son, and no parent should outlive their son. It should be the other way around, children should be grieving the loss of their parents. So, this is a guy I got a lot of respect for him. He didn't, when this happened, he didn't just shrink to a corner, He said, I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight back, and I'm going to get justice. So, Bill, tell us what happened that day with this shooting with Officer Mosher, who seems to be shooting a lot of people. 3 shootings in 5 years is horrendous.
That's right. And just to put that in perspective, I know an awful lot of officers who have served 20, 30-year careers, and they've never fired their weapon in anger.
Oh, yeah.
And so Mosher was really one of these new generation cops that's very trigger happy. And I call them the 13er cops. That's not my term. It came out of a great book called The Fourth Turning. And they identified that generation as the 13th generation of Americans. They're pretty much the baby boomers' kids, if you will. And they're a different generation than has ever come before. In that book, they outline a number of characteristics. I've reiterated those characteristics in Chapter 10 of The Permit. But one of the very fascinating elements in that list is the fact that this generation was the first one raised on video games.
Right.
So we now have cops out there that have been shooting and killing everything from aliens to bad guys, at least virtually, with what? Absolutely no consequences, right? So according to psychological research that I interviewed when I was a reporter, these kids who have spent an inordinate amount of time in their formative years playing video games, often violent video games, have literally wired their brains to shoot and kill. That's why a lot of the older cops tell me the younger ones scare them to death. They no longer go, the younger cops no longer go through this spectrum of escalating use of force. They jump to the lethal end and pull their gun and shoot. Well, that's what Bill Mosher was wired to do, too, for whatever reason. So, back to recap. Erik,
real quick, though, did he see combat in the Marines?
He was in combat zone. He claimed on the stand that he never shot anybody.
Okay.
But that's important. It's important, Ed. There's a lot of data that says even if you never shot and killed somebody, the fact that you were in combat zone, you may wind up with PTSD to one degree or another. Nevertheless, I maintain that any cop that has been trained in the combat arms, specifically carry a rifle and go into combat, they are literally programmed to see everybody out there as a potential enemy, and they're ready to shoot and kill. So that's a different kind of mentality than we prefer in our cops. Unfortunately, on July 10th, 2010, my son turned 180 degrees, and that's what he found, was an amped up, very nervous, scared stiff cop who was screaming 3 conflicting commands, drop it, don't do that, get on the ground, and fired all within 2 seconds. It's all on the audio recording, because Shay Larley was still standing there with his phone still in contact with the Metro call taker. So we have the actual timing of this. So in that 2 seconds, Erik had to stop, turn 180 degrees, assess the situation. Some of the witnesses, and we have about 23 witnesses that have never been heard from, but we have them all on record. A guy similar to you, a private investigator working for my lawyer at the time, rounded up these witnesses. Many of them came forward and, have them on records. Erik did absolutely nothing.
Because one of the things important to point out is that right after this shooting, there were a lot of people that were milling around in front of Costco, and the cops came out there and told them all to get out of there.
Yeah, the cops carefully selected those who they wanted to interview. Now, we can get into that when we talk about the inquest, if you will.
Yeah.
But the actual shooting, it's important to know that Erik always carried his BlackBerry in one hand or the other. He never put it in his pocket because he was always on it. Erik had his BlackBerry in his right hand based on a lot of witness testimony. Mosier may have mistaken that for a gun. He was expecting to find a gun, a guy carrying a concealed weapon. He saw the BlackBerry. Mosier still got his dark glasses on, and what? What's the situation? It's roughly high noon by the sun, right? They're still under the covering in front of the Costco there in Summerlin. But Erik is backlit now. He's got hundreds of cars in the parking lot, all of them reflecting light back towards him. Mosier's got his sunglasses on. He can't tell what's in Erik's hand, perhaps. He claims Erik pulled the gun, including the holster, from an inside the belt configuration. I've tried it, cannot be done. It's impossible to do. I've tried it over and over and over with a timer. I cannot do it with one hand because of a clip that's on that holster. Cannot pull the gun and the holster out in less than about 3 seconds. That's max. Erik had 2 seconds from the time Mosier started screaming and Erik turned, and by some witness accounts, Erik still had the presence of mind to say, I am armed, and with his left hand, he lifted his T-shirt to expose the gun inside the belt holster. But as he elevated his right elbow to the side, Mosier fired. Mosier fired twice. And in his own testimony, I fired double tap center mass.
Yeah.
Okay? First round hit Erik in the heart and killed him. Erik turned, looked at his girlfriend with this look that said, what the hell just happened? She started screaming. Mosier's second round went through the outside of Erik's right thigh. That round wound up, we don't know where. But it's a wonder it didn't kill somebody else. As Erik crumpled and turned to his right and fell on the ground, 2 other cops, Thomas Mendiola and Jason Stark, were standing at the other entrance to Costco with their weapons drawn. They had no idea what was going on. They just heard Mosier screaming, but very important, even they didn't know what he was saying because the acoustics under that cover there at Costco were such that even those close to Mosier couldn't understand what he said. I always wondered, did Erik really understand what he was being told to do? Nevertheless, Mendiola and Stark, they were alarmed. Mosier had fired twice, so they opened up. Everybody wants to get in the act, right? So Mendiola put 4 and Stark put 1 round in Erik's back, all of them in his back after he was falling or on the ground. 1 round went up through Erik's buttock and lodged in his bladder. So he was on the ground, horizontal, and they were still firing at him. So what happened then? Mosier calmly holsters his firearm, goes over, puts his knee in Erik's back, and handcuffs him. Nobody ever tried to administer first aid or anything. And that's when the cover-up started, Ed.
Yeah, and there was a doctor there on the scene, too, who testified at the inquest.
Yep. There were, everybody went crazy. All the patrons that were standing outside when the firing started, they were running, screaming, diving. People were, taking their kids to the deck and covering them up. One lady was tipped over out of a wheelchair.
Right. I forgot about that. Right.
And the bottom line is, if Erik hadn't been so big and so muscular, and he soaked up 7 rounds, only one of them went through him, I guarantee you there have been other people injured or killed, because these cops went ape for no reason. There was absolutely no reason to engage Erik like that. Any sensible cop in a real professional police department would simply have followed him into the parking lot and said, "Sir, can we have a moment with you?" There was no reason to engage him. He was, in Mosier's own words, when Erik walked past Mosier said Erik was, quote, unremarkable. In other words, he didn't even notice him.
Yeah.
He wasn't acting erratic or anything else. So the bottom line was that Erik was murdered. He was executed by a scared cop, and then 2 other cops that are totally clueless, fired 5 more into Erik's back. So here we have a stellar person literally murdered on the steps of Costco for absolutely no reason. Now, the cover-up started immediately. It was about 40 minutes before the homicide detectives arrived on scene. When the shooting stopped, witnesses said there was one item on the ground, Erik's BlackBerry. When his body went into the ambulance, one witness says, I saw the gun. It was still in the holster, still inside Erik's waistband. And they just threw him in the ambulance like, as one witness said, like a sack of potatoes, and whisked him away. Why? Because Metro always does this. They always claim signs of life, lights and sirens, get to the hospital. The first round hit Erik and exploded his heart. He was dead before he hit the ground. Well, because the weapon was still in Erik's waistband, they had to get rid of the body immediately. And yet when the homicide detectives arrived, there was Erik's .45 weapon still in its holster, laying on the ground within arm's reach of the BlackBerry. So the cover-up was immediate. And that's the standard for Metro.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there was even right before this, they shot the ice cream truck, the woman who drove the ice cream truck in my neighborhood right here. You know that story, right? You must.
Yes, I do. Yep.
Yeah. So
within 3 weeks before Erik, they shot Trevon Cole in his own bathroom.
Right.
Yeah. So this happens all the time.
Yeah, there was another one after Erik too, where a couple was having an argument in front of a 7-Eleven, and somebody called the cops, and the man was like 60 years old, 65 years old, and they shot him, and he said it was because the bottom of his cane. The guy was walking with a cane, and they said the bottom of his cane was sharpened to a point and could have been used as a weapon. They shot him dead.
Well, a lot of that, I can go ahead and finish a little bit of this.
Yeah.
The cover-up. Within hours, there was a report from the ambulance crew. That was an AMR ambulance. So they're not under the control of Clark County, right? And in their report, they stated that they found a gun and a holster and an extra magazine to the firearm on Erik's body.
In the ambulance.
Wait a minute. How can we have one on the ground and they find one on the body? Oh, my God. Metro panicked. We have to get a second gun and claim Erik was carrying 2 of them. So here's what they did. They called up one of their buddies, a former cop who had gotten in trouble, and they whisked him away and parked him over at the public administrator's office, the PA. So they call this guy up, and he is immediately calling up my other son. Kevin, who was on his way to a business meeting in New Orleans. He had changed planes in Dallas. That's where a social worker managed to track him down, called him, and informed him that his brother had been shot to death. Before Kevin could practically hang up the phone, this stupid public administrator, Groden was his name, was calling Kevin, said, "Hey, we have to get into your brother's condo." Well, why? Well, we have to protect it from potential burglary of weapons and valuables. Kevin said, "Forget it. There's no reason to get in there. I will be there as soon as I can get there. And by the way, Erik's girlfriend lives there. She's in control of the place." Okay, Kevin has to jump on an airplane to get back to California. While he is in the air, Groden calls back 2 more times and says, and we've got it on recording, "I absolutely have to get into your brother's condo to secure these things." And
oh, wait, this guy Groden is not even a cop?
no, he's a former cop. He worked for the public administrator's office, which is now under the coroner's office out there. Why? Because the PA's office has had so many scandals out there. They finally shoved it under the coroner's office to help try to, bury things. That's a whole different story. Anyway.
Wait, hold on. Bill, Cindy, we can hear you. Can you mute up? Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Bill. Go ahead.
Okay. So then the third call from Groden says, totally different attitude. "Hey, we don't need your permission. We have the authority. We're going in as soon as Metro gets here." So Metro cop shows up with a locksmith. They take the lock off Erik's condo. They go in and, quote, secure valuables. They pick up a bunch of random things. But get this, Ed, they leave his computer, his laptop computer, on his desk. They take one plastic watch, and yet Erik had a collection of high-dollar watches in his closet. And here's what they really wanted. They picked up a small Ruger pistol that was laying on the nightstand on Erik's side there of the bed, and an extra magazine. That's what they really needed. Just for good measure, they stole another .45 that Erik had stuffed between the cushions of the sofa because there had been a lot of home invasions, and Erik's condo opened right out onto a golf course. So my son was no fool. He was ready for whatever happened. Now get this. They left a bunch of high-dollar rifles under Erik's bed. He was a firearms collector and an investor. That year, he said, "Dad, forget about investing in stocks. You better invest in guns. They're going through the roof right now for political reasons, etc." So, he had everything from an M1 that his grandfather, a retired Army officer, had given him to, much more contemporary weapons. He had a lot of them. But they left those under the bed and stole that little Ruger. That's what they really wanted, and a .45. The .45 has never surfaced. However, later on, during the inquest hearing, that little Ruger showed up, and they claimed that was the second gun he was carrying.
And wasn't there something, too, like one of the magazines didn't even fit the gun that they planted?
Erik always carried an extra magazine for the .45, but the .45 was what was left on the ground.
All right.
The one that he had on his body with a pouch that was on the left side of his belt, that was never returned to me. That magazine was never returned to me, but it shows up in the investigation photos. How do they explain that? And the little Ruger magazine would never have worked in there. It would have rattled around, and yet they claimed that the extra magazine was in his pocket. None of this makes sense, Ed, because Erik always carried his wallet in his right front pocket. That's where they claimed they found the Ruger. But we've tried it. I have that Ruger back. It is physically impossible to get his fat wallet, 1 3/4 inch, or 1 3/4 inches thick, and that Ruger in the pocket of a pair of jeans. Nevertheless, that was the narrative that Metro cops came up with in order to claim that a gun was found on the body as well as one on the ground. And the one on the ground, they say, well, the only way it could have gotten there is if Erik pulled it. No, he never touched it. Mosier absolutely murdered him because Erik had a BlackBerry in his hand.
Oh, we're coming up to that really long break, but when we get back, I want to clarify the part about did they confess about taking this gun and planting this gun. Now, during this break, we can't talk over the break because the audience will hear us, but it's a nice long break. You got about 7 minutes, okay, Bill? We're here now with Bill Scott, author of The Permit. He's the father of Erik Scott, who is a West Point graduate, business administrative master's in business degree, shot and killed by Las Vegas Metro Police. And then we're getting into the part right now about the cover-up. Then we're going to get into the inquest hearing about how that was a sham. And then we're going to get into Mr. Scott's attempts to try and get justice in the civil court. And we'll get into that story when we get back right after this. Thank you. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Every Friday night, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, you can find us here on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Studio A, and we're simulcast on CJ Mars Radio and 365 Live and hazyradio.com. We're here tonight with author Bill Scott. He's the author of the book, The Permit. And that's a story of the Las Vegas Police Department's murder of his son, who was doing nothing more than shopping in Costco and legally carrying a firearm. I don't even know why that's even an issue, but he was shopping in Costco and walking out of Costco when he was targeted by this cop and shot in cold blood. And then we were getting into the part about the cover-up of this murder. So, Bill, I'm a little unclear about the two guns, and I'm very familiar with the story, so if I'm unclear, other people may be as well. Now, they take him into the ambulance. The gun was still on him. Somehow along the way, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And the only thing that could have happened, they always send a cop with the body.
Right.
But at some point, either before the ambulance left or en route to the hospital, to Universal Medical Center, that gun was taken back to Costco, the gun and the holster, which was ironic. They took the gun and the holster and put it back on the concrete in front of Costco before the Metro detectives got there. It took them 40 minutes to get there. And you say, why? Well, they have to have time to get the crime scene right, correct?
Right.
And if they had arrived immediately, if they had not taken the body, everything would have played out a lot differently. However, the one wild card in this was the ambulance crew that found the gun on Erik's body, again, either before it left or while they were en route. They documented that in their report. All of a sudden, Metro was in a dilemma. How could they have a gun found on Erik's body and a gun and the holster on the ground in front of Costco as if Erik had pulled it? They had to have a second gun. That's why they broke into Erik's condo and stole a small Ruger, which they later claimed was the so-called second gun.
Right. They went in there under the ruse that they had to secure the apartment. But really they went to get this one specific gun that looked like the other gun, similar at least, that they could plant. But now, did that come out in the inquest?
Yes. It wasn't until the inquest hearing, Ed, that we even knew about this second gun.
Gotcha.
So during the testimony by two detectives, Barry Jensen and Callos was his last name. Well, Callos was considered a fairly good cop. He looked like he was about to puke, but he was the one that held up this small Ruger. It's about the size of your hand, and a clip or a magazine, and claimed that that's what Erik was carrying as a second gun. That's the only way they could make their narrative play.
Right.
So, but I guarantee you, it flat was not true. And a former cop, Mike McDaniel, lives in Texas. He's now an English teacher. He was a cop for 12 years, both in the Air Force and as a civilian cop. Even from Texas, going strictly by the reports coming through the concealed weapon community, the gun community in general, which was totally inflamed over Erik's murder, as well as monitoring media reports coming out of Las Vegas there. Mike said, from Texas, he said, this smells from day one. It doesn't add up. So Mike started blogging about it. And he did an amazing analysis of this two-gun situation. And it's on his website, blog site, which is called Stately McDaniel Manor. And it's at WordPress.com. But you can Google up Stately McDaniel Manor and look under update 19. And he absolutely eviscerates Metro's two-gun narrative. It just will not play.
Wait, you tell me that one of the cops who testified is now coming out and attacking the official police version?
No, let me clarify.
I'm sorry.
Mike has nothing to do with Metro.
Okay.
He just happened to be a former cop that worked in other parts of the nation, okay?
Okay, now I understand. Sorry.
Yep, but he's in Texas now. He's teaching high school English. But because he was such a professional cop, he smelled Metro's stink, 1,000 some miles away. And he started writing about it. He's done a terrific job. And by the way, there'll be more coming out from Mike McDaniel and me in the near future.
Okay.
The bottom line is this two-gun theory is the cornerstone of Metro's cover-up. And once you look at it carefully, it falls apart. Now, there's one other critical element, Ed, that I did the analysis on based on Metro's so-called investigation report, which is the sloppiest piece of work, 1,472 pages that you'll ever lay eyes on. I did the analysis of the Costco video data. Now, get this. There were cameras inside the Costco store and outside where Erik was shot to death. Those cameras fed two different digital video recorders in the Costco security room. Okay? Well, lo and behold, the one DVR that recorded what Erik was doing in the store and outside mysteriously had damage to it. But get this. The good old sharp Metro detectives left that DVR in Costco's hands for 5 days before they decided to go pick it up. That never happens. Any professional police department will not leave a crime scene, but what they take, usually the cameras and the DVR system in total, but not this time. Metro left it in Costco's hands. Costco, quote, tried diligently to recover the data. Okay. Only 4% of the data on that DVR was unrecoverable. That came out of the coroner's inquest hearing. Forensics experts said, we tried to recover the data. Only 4% was unrecoverable. It just happened to be the time that Erik was in the store and being shot to death outside.
Now, you're talking about the guy from, I think it was the owner or the CEO of FTK Access Data Software?
Yeah, at the time they called it Las Vegas Locking Systems, I think it was. And they were the contractor for Costco.
Okay.
But, one of the Secret Service forensic guys that they brought in to try to recover the data. Now, get this, Ed. Why did they go to all that trouble to recover the data when Costco also testified during the inquest hearing that the system wasn't even operating during that period, that it had been shut down the previous Thursday and Erik was killed on a Saturday.
Right.
So if it wasn't even operating during that time, why even go through the exercise of trying to recover data from it? So there are so many inconsistencies that in a real court of law, Metro's narrative, Costco's narrative would have been totally blown off the face of the earth.
Yeah, but at the time, at these coroner's inquests, it's one-sided.
It is.
It's run by the DA's office, or at the time it was. I know they made some changes due to this case. They made some changes to it, minuscule changes.
That's right.
Go ahead.
But at the time, it's called a quasi-legal fact-finding exercise. They call it the coroner's inquest hearing. Well, the way it works is only the DA can call witnesses. Only the district attorneys can ask questions of the witnesses. And the family and their lawyer cannot say a word. They sit behind the barrier. They're not even in the official courtroom. They can only submit written questions to a bailiff who will take them to the judge, who isn't a real judge, just a magistrate, who decides whether to read those questions in front of the jury. Well, if you don't quite get the answer you want and you scribble out a follow-up question, the judge looks at it, or did in our case, and says, we've already addressed that.
Really?
So this is the most unbelievable kangaroo court in the nation. And its sole purpose in life in Las Vegas, the only reason it was set up, was to exonerate cops. And it worked outstandingly well. In 34 years, from the time it was created until Erik was killed in 2010, there had been close to 200, I think it was 194 coroner's inquests over if somebody died like Erik did, right? 194 over 34 years, and not one single cop had ever been found at fault. What an incredibly perfect Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. I mean, they're better than anybody else in the nation, right?
Yeah, I believe the last time a cop was found culpable was way back during the time of Casino with the hole in the wall gang. Way back then was the last time they had a cop get a disciplinary action for shooting a civilian.
But even he was never prosecuted.
Right.
So the bottom line is they always find justified. Why? Because even after 6 days of testimony, almost 50 witnesses in our case, and Erik's hearing, coroner's inquest hearing, was twice as long as any previous one had ever been. So it ran 6 days.
And why do you think that was? Do you think it was because of the outrage of the general community? Like everyone, this thing stunk, like from the bat. But I remember when I first heard about this, a lot of people were saying, hey, you don't know Erik's father. He's not going to let this go. He's going to come to town. He's going to shake things up. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. So what do you think made this such an event that, that everyone knew it was wrong?
There were several reasons for that, Ed. I think it was because Erik looked like so many of us.
Yeah.
And this took place not in some dark back alley somewhere where the cops could control the narrative totally. This happened at high noon in front of a Costco in a nice part of Las Vegas in Summerlin with, 50-some witnesses around. So the DA knew it was a very, very shaky case. So they had to parade out there a whole mess of witnesses, which were handpicked, I wish you had seen some of these. These were elderly women, a lot of them. Some of them had Coke bottle glasses. Some of them were totally confused. They had no idea what the geometry was. They thought Erik had his back to a wall. They thought the cops, there was a bunch of cops, they said, not even just 3, formed a circle around him and shot him when he was stupid enough to pull a gun at them. I mean, it was just preposterous. It was almost as if the DA was thumbing their nose at the rest of the world saying, we could a cop-clearing circus. Now, here's an interesting thing. Because there was so much outrage after Erik's killing, I mean, the comments that were online under every news story ran on the order of 250 to 300 comments.
Right.
And, after I did my first interview with Channel 8 out there, George Knapp, who I had known before, I had worked with him before when I was a reporter, chasing spooky airplanes out there in the desert. And George called me the next day after we did this interview, and he said, this has gone crazy, Bill. He said, we have over 250 comments. This never happens. And I said, well, what do you attribute it to? And he said, because Erik looked like us. Mm. Okay. And everybody is shocked and said, this could happen to me or one of my loved ones too. So that's kind of the quick overview of it. Back to the videotape. Of course, it was considered unusable. So, frankly, Metro, working in concert with Costco, they disappeared that video data because had it been shown publicly, everybody would have known that Mosier murdered Erik and that Erik did nothing wrong in the store. So that their entire story, the entire justification for calling Metro, would never stand up to video scrutiny.
Oh, boy.
Now,
Go ahead.
I know you kind of want to get into the legal aspects, Ed, and that was a nightmare that also defies realism. We had a lawyer, Ross Goodman, there in town.
Oscar Goodman's son.
Yes, which at the time I said, is this a good idea?
Yeah.
Well, Erik had known Ross. Ross had known Erik. They had worked together before. Some of Erik's friends had pretty much already brought Ross into the picture before I even got there. And, I grilled him, and he promised me 1,000% that this was a slam dunk, etc. Well, he brought in another big firm there in town, what is now called Egglet Wall, because there were going to be like 80 depositions. It's going to take a lot of lawyers to pull this off, right? Well, they brought in one use of force expert, some ex-super cop from the northwestern U.S. That super cop looked at all of the witness testimony, including what we had as well as what was aired at the coroner's inquest. Now, get this. If there were 4 or 5 people on the cop side of the ledger that said Erik touched his gun, reached for his gun, did anything that qualified as a, quote, furtive move, that justified his being shot to death. It didn't matter that we had 24 people that said, no, he didn't do any of that. And the only thing on the ground when the shooting was over was Erik's BlackBerry. It is not a preponderance of evidence issue. The cops have a get-out-of-jail-free card they call qualified immunity. So in this case, the use of force expert that was hired by our lawyers said, it doesn't matter how many people say Erik didn't do anything wrong. As long as the cops have a few people that said he did do something wrong, you may win at the local level, but this will be appealed to the Ninth Circuit Court, and they have a 90+% record of finding in favor of the cops under this qualified immunity issue. What does qualified immunity mean? You could probably explain it better than I can. But in essence, it puts a brick on the cop's side of the scales of justice. And it's very hard to overcome, very hard to overcome. As a result, our lawyers said, the bottom line is we're not going to press on with this, and we had to drop the case. We also filed against Costco. The very first hearing, Costco's lawyer moved to dismiss. The judge there in Las Vegas, she inserted herself into the arguments before the lawyers even had a chance to present their arguments or their case. And it was just a hearing. Should this go forward or not? And this judge jumped in there and said, I've read, everything from both sides, and I don't see that you've established malice. Now, what does that mean? That meant that there was prior history between Shay Larley and my son Erik, which was impossible. It's the first time Erik had been in Costco, and Larley never claimed he had ever seen Erik before. So the judge inserted that as a factor and then immediately ruled and said, because you haven't established malice, I move and find in favor of Costco. Case is dismissed. So my lawyer, after that, shook his head and said, I don't think it's possible to get justice in this town. And I agree. So what happened, Ed? I can't tell you because I don't know for sure. But this old reporter and a former engineer has spent a lot of his life looking at facts and digging out facts. I was an investigative reporter for 22 years. I know how to work sources. I know how to protect sources. The bottom line is this. The big money that runs Las Vegas, the Strip, they said this Erik Scott case is hurting our bottom line because people all over the world and the nation know about it, and they're not coming to Vegas. People are not going to move to Vegas anymore. They're scared of the cops, okay? Now, was that true or was that perception? I don't know. The bottom line is the big money said, make this go away. And all the players in the cartel of corruption, which constitutes the cops, the DA, the public administrator, the union, Police Protective Association, and the big bucks guys on the Strip that pull all the strings, they decided the Erik Scott case will go away, and it did. But it's a bit of a blessing, sir. because I am not muzzled.
Right, right. Since you didn't take a settlement, right, they can't shut you up. Because in some of these other cases, like the ice cream truck lady, they did receive settlements, not mediocre, like, 100,000, 300,000. There was a guy who had a diabetic seizure, and the cops beat the crap out of him, and he got a settlement.
Yep. So did Steve Gibson's widow.
Right.
The cops shot him to death. But we didn't get a settlement. We didn't settle for anything. So I am free to talk, and I am free to conduct an asymmetric war against the cartel of corruption, and that's what I've been doing. The permit is just the first of many rounds. There will be more. And by the time I'm done, not just me, I have an awful lot of amazing allies out there. I call them Erik's Warriors. And they are working all over the United States, not just against Las Vegas and its cartel of corruption, but the cartels all across the country. And little by little, we're chipping away at them, Ed, because even though Las Vegas may be the perfect storm, it has a cartel of corruption that sets the standard for all of them. Why? Because, the mob has been in there. The mob created Las Vegas. Las Vegas still operates on, an incredible wave of corruption all the time. They're very sophisticated. It's just not visible to the average visitor. Any of those 43 million visitors that show up in town to have a little fun every year, they rarely run into it. But look at the numbers. You've been there, Ed. When the Las Vegas Review-Journal did its story back in, I think it was 2011 or 12, 5-part series they did looking at Las Vegas Metro's killings. At that time, they had logged 310 officer-involved shootings since 1990. And as of 2010, 115 were fatal. Now, since that time, the killing has continued. 2011, 12 OISs, officer-involved shootings. 6 of them were fatal. 2012, down to 6 officer-involved shootings, 2 fatal. Why the big drop? Department of Justice, their cops, the community-oriented policing people, had heard about Las Vegas Metro's unbelievable record of killings, so they rolled in to do just a friendly look-see, provide some help, right? It's not a true DOJ investigation of Metro. But they came away with 75 recommendations for improvement. Good old Sheriff Douglas Gillespie there, one of the most crooked sheriffs on the face of the earth. He was scared to death that his legacy would be a police department left under a federal consent decree. Well, that's the kiss of death for any lawmen out there, right? So what did he do? Put out the word, stop the shooting, guys. So they dropped their OISs to 6 in 2012. All right. The report came out, and said, you got to make these changes. So they started trying to change the Metro policies, practices, procedures, and training. And they started checking them off, right? 2013, they had, we're not quite sure, but it seems like it was on the order of 3, but I think there were actually more than that. And the bottom line is it looks like they have cut back tremendously. Not so. They just got worried because the Department of Justice was in there. In 2014, so far, the different police departments there in Vegas have shot 15 people, I believe it is. Don't know how many of those are fatal. The point is, Las Vegas still ranks on a per capita basis near the top in the nation for officer-involved shootings. Las Vegas cops shoot and kill a lot.
It's not a dangerous place. This is not a dangerous place to live. There aren't cops getting shot. There aren't cops getting attacked. There aren't cops getting beat up. It's just not happening,
And this is a situation across the nation, Ed.
Yeah.
So once I got into this, 5,000 Americans have been shot and killed by cops since 9/11. So very shortly now, the cops are going to top what Al-Qaeda killed on 9/11. So I asked the question, get this, who are the most dangerous domestic terrorists in town, right? Cops just this year, here's some new figures. As of late August, and this is just based on news reports, more than 700 people have been killed in the U.S. since January 1st of this year. As of today, reporters have logged 1,516 people killed in the United States by cops. They're now averaging on the order of 3 per day, which is off the charts compared to other countries. We literally have an epidemic of officer-involved shootings and killings. And if we don't get a handle on it, I think we're going to trigger outright rebellion because more and more people have had it with killer cops. I mean, look at what happened in Ferguson, Missouri when Michael Brown was shot and killed. We don't know the details, the facts behind that officer-involved shooting. And I won't pretend to prejudge it. However, it scared the willies out of the Department of Justice, Attorney General Eric Holder, and it scared the White House. It was not all about race, as they've tried to make it. What they were afraid of was that the riots in Ferguson were going to spread to other cities, because this nation is on the verge of a backlash against cops like you would not believe. If you look at Chapter 10 of my book, The Permit, there's an argument between 2 high-ranking people in there, and they go through all of these factors. And one of them takes the attitude that most citizens have in this nation, and I was one of them, Ed, before Erik was killed. I thought cops were pretty good for the most part. Yeah, there's a few rogues out there all the time. But, you know, cops are doing the job, they're protecting us, they're out there to protect and serve. I've since learned, if you just look at the statistics, if you look at the attitudes displayed by cops roaming the streets in Ferguson, that is a microcosm of America today. We still have professional cops out there, thank God. We also have one hell of a lot of outlaws and rogues. Las Vegas, as I said, is it's one of the worst. It is the perfect storm by their own estimation. And these are good cops in Las Vegas that have been helping me since day one out there. They say that 20 to 30% of the Las Vegas Metro cops qualify as rogues or outlaws. They're bad cops. They shouldn't even be there, but they are. And they're the ones that are shooting and killing for the most part. What's going to be the backlash? One of these days, there'll be a situation not unlike what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, not unlike what happened to my son in Vegas. It'll be a flashpoint. And at that point, you're going to have armed civilians out there hunting cops down. And what does that translate to? That's chaos. That's chaos. I don't want to see it. So what do? I personally think, Ed, we have to restore honor. You have to restore honor to what once was an honorable profession, law enforcement. Yeah, and there's a number of things we have to do. Stop calling it law enforcement. Go back to what we used to call cops, peace officers. It's an attitudinal change that is not healthy. And I maintain that if it's not armed citizens that start the backlash, it'll be other cops. There'll be good cops that say, these rogues are putting my life in danger. I predict that good cops are going to start taking out bad cops.
Bill, do you think so? Because, you know, I grew up in Staten Island in New York, and it's a huge, the New York City Police Department is like the largest in the world. And there was a lot of cops on Staten Island. Your friends were cops or friends, you knew a bunch of cops.
Yep.
But they socialized with civilians. And you knew cops, you were friends with cops, you had their little PBA cards, you get out of tickets and stuff like that, and you can get out of tickets when you're getting pulled over. But it seems like when I came out here, that the cops here in Vegas are they isolate themselves from the community, and they only socialize with each other. And there also seems to be, in the training too, there's an arrogance that they instill into these guys these days as well. But another issue is the steroids and the testosterone treatments. that they all seem to be getting some kind of supplements, and they're all pumped up with these steroids. And have you gotten into that kind of thing?
Absolutely, Ed. And you've touched on one of those factors that has turned the current generation cops into a completely different breed than the kind that you grew up with, that I grew up with. Again, the new generation, the 13er cops, they're a cynical bunch, and they're very much focused on self-protection.
Right.
And the training academies fuel that. They even get graduate training, if you will, from people that roll into town and put on these symposia, if you will. And I've heard straight from students of them that they use something called kellology. David Grossman, it just disgusts me to no end. He's a retired Army officer. He was an instructor at West Point while my son was there. He might even have been one of Erik's instructors. He now has a private business, and he has developed something he calls kellology. So he goes to places like Las Vegas, and I know he was there within the last couple of years, teaching this. You do whatever you have to go home at night.
Right.
Everybody out there is a potential killer. Don't wait until they pull down on you. Shoot first. Let God sort out the good from the bad. That's the attitude that they're teaching. Who do you think was in one of David Grossman's classes 2 years ago?
Mosher.
Yeah,
Mosher, yeah.
Yep, somebody I know, saw him firsthand. However, you had another question about the steroid use and growth hormones. Growth hormones are just another, name for steroids. Cops nowadays think they have to be these bulked up RoboCops. So a lot of them live in the gym, but it's not enough. Once you get to a certain age, it's hard to build muscle. So the easy way is pump up. There is one doctor in town that I know of. Most of his clients are cops. What does he specialize in? Growth hormones. It's supposed to help, the stars down on the strip and the girls and everybody stay young looking. No, that's not his primary clientele. 90% of his clientele are cops that come in on a regular basis to get a shot of growth hormones.
Yeah.
That's why they all roam around pumped up. A lot of these guys live on these drinks like Red Bull. So they're amped up too. This is all about being the bad, tough guy, right? Well, how many of these people are running around with roid rage? Was Mosier one of them? I don't know. He looked like the doughboy, or the Michelin man, all puffed up. And a lot of people said that's a sign that he was probably taking steroids of some kind or another. I don't know. I'm not accusing him of that. The point is, he was totally out of shape, and he was scared stiff the day that he shot Erik to death.
Yeah, if you're getting the shots, if you're getting like the testosterone shots and the human growth hormone shots, but you're not working out, you're not going to, it gives you some benefit, but you're still going to be like a puffy slob, just like you said, you see a lot of those guys.
And cops all over the nation are doing exactly that.
Yeah.
That's one of many reasons why they're killing. A lot of it is attitudinal changes. Since 9/11, the feds have been pumping money down to so-called first responders. And what have they been doing with all that money? They've been buying heavy-duty armament, right? And then the DOD, Department of Defense, makes it even worse. They've been transferring surplus equipment down to police departments at the local level. So now every little burg in America has its own SWAT team that are running around with M4s, body armor, helmets, and a lot of them even have MRAPs, or armored vehicles.
Right.
Now, why does a little burg in North Dakota need an MRAP? Well, I don't know. We never know when a terrorist might show up, right? Well, go back to statistics, Ed. Statistics put together by the Centers for Disease Control says, as of now, we Americans are 8 times more likely to be killed by a cop than we are a terrorist. Well, the apologists, the badge lookers say, yeah, but it's a dangerous world out there. The bad guys are gunned up more. We have to gun up too, just to stay even, and cops get killed all the time. Well, wait a minute. Take a look at statistics again. nowadays, cops or policing literally does not make the top 10 most dangerous jobs in America.
That's right.
Farming, oil rig roughneck, and my favorite, test pilots are a lot more, those are much more dangerous career fields than being a police officer. The number of cops being killed per year versus the population has never been lower. The worst of it was in the 70s, but now it's way down. Instead, again, statistics put together by credible people, a cop nowadays is 130 times more likely to be involved in a misconduct incident than he is to be killed in the line of duty.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
130 times. So, policing is not near as dangerous as we're led to believe. That's just a narrative coming out of the police unions. Unfortunately, politicians soak it up. They believe it, right? So, cops turn out getting more salary, more armament, etc. Yes, a lot of police departments are underfunded and undermanned, but it's not for lack of a lot of money pouring down from the feds. That's why we saw this militarized force rolling in Ferguson, Missouri. And that was a huge wake-up call to Americans to actually see on national TV armored vehicles and robocops. These guys in helmets, camouflage, guns strapped to their legs, carrying semi-automatic M4s. Some of these are fully automatic, in fact. And the real clincher, there was a guy sitting on top of one of those armored vehicles with a full-blown machine gun aimed at the crowd of rioters.
Well, weren't even rioters. That was in the daytime, and they were women and children with baby carriages protesting. When we first saw the appearance of the lineup of the cop with the tank and the machine gun.
There are several of us have been waving the flag about this militarization problem of police departments for several years. Radley Balco and I have been on panels together, and Radley's really on the forefront of that. He wrote a great book called The Warrior Cop, The Militarization of American Police Forces, and it's been doing quite well, but it still didn't make the impact of the evening news with those images out of Ferguson. All of a sudden, everybody said, hold it, hold it. Since when did we Americans sign up to have an occupying army that is really our police forces? We, the taxpayers, are paying these guys salaries, and they're gunned up and looking at us as if we're the enemy.
Yeah.
So what do we do about that? I call it starve the beast. It's up to the feds to cut off the money and not only stop sending military gear down to local first responders, but ask for it back. Take it back. Every one of these police departments should turn in their armored vehicles and send all of those automatic weapons back. One small problem. There's a news report out in the last 2 weeks that said hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, worth of that DOD gear, that military gear that was sent down to police forces, is missing.
Yeah, even a tank, one of those MRAPs is missing. You know?
And the most predominant missing weapon, the M4 carbine or the AR-15. It's basically the military M16 that I qualified on when I was in the Air Force. Well, where do you think those go? They go home. Cops are stealing them. That's what's happening.
Hey,
we
Bill,
have a serious problem.
I got to read some ads real quick, okay?
Roger.
So as a matter of fact, if you want to take a break and get a glass of water. First one, I want to remind everybody about my friend Jessica Styron Jacobson, her GoFundMe.com account. She's trying to raise funds to take care of her kids. She's struggling out there. And if we could really help her out, that would be a big deal. These are really, really happy kids, beautiful kids, and they love their mom, but they need things. They need clothes and shoes and books for school and stuff like that. Then we have Amanda over at Pacific West Bamboo, 503-839-8126. Pacific West Bamboo, your number one source for timber construction and craft-grade bamboo poles, plants, products, and more. They specialize in eco-friendly reclaimed wood products for the home and garden. So if you have a craft project or something like that, you can make little waterfalls out of these bamboo products and stuff like that. Contact Amanda over at Pacific West Bamboo if your project is big or small, and you need a construction project, look into bamboo. It's very durable for flooring and all that kind of stuff. Mike over at infinityhomeplans.com. Mike Gray, check out Infinity Home Plans and Design Services, your resource for 3D and 2D draftsman services. They offer a multitude of products, including stock home plans, 2D digital drawing sets, 3D model renderings, and more. Hey, don't forget, Victoria Maria Opperman has a show called Teen Truth, and it's on Saturday afternoons. That's tomorrow. On cjmarsradio.com at 1 p.m., and it's also played on Sunday on another station that I don't think we're allowed to mention anymore. But look for Victoria, Teen Truth, and on all her activities. Emailrevealer.com. Look into the online infidelity investigation. You think your husband's cheating on you? Give us his email address. We could trace it back to online dating websites and come back with a list of all the places he's registered to. We can even contact him with personal ads and kind of lure him into something and try and catch him cheating on you. Okay. Oh, and then we have New World Mexican Women. These beautiful women in the state of Guerrero in Mexico. It's a large state. It's not a small state, but it's in the southern division of Mexico. They've written this book of love letters to their men and their husbands and their fathers and their grandfathers living in America, pretty much begging them to come back, and beautiful letters. They've written it handwritten in Spanish, then translated it into English and typed out so you can read it real clearly. If you speak Spanish, if you speak English, there's also pictures of these women and their families. And then they also teach you how to make authentic Mexican jewelry. Now, this book, New World Mexican Women, the link is up on my blog, the Opperman Report. You can go to lulu.com and pick it up. They've taken their funds from their summer, and they put it to advertise on our show here to sell these books. So we really need to support them. Okay, and good old Mike Gray said he was going to buy one of their books. He's a really cool guy. Thanks, Mike, for doing that. But we have with us tonight Bill Scott, who's the father of Erik Scott. He's the author of the book, The Permit. You can find that at Amazon.com and also Barnes & Noble. Oh, boy. Okay, Bill, man, we got about a good 17 minutes left, or 15 minutes left about.
Okay.
What do you think, man? Do you really see hope that we're going to turn this around and get back to a place where we could trust our police and where they're not rude to us? We're not afraid. When we look in the rearview mirror and we see the cops behind us, we're not going to be scared anymore?
I think we can, Ed, but it's going to take a massive cultural change. It has to be dictated from the top. We need a Department of Justice that doesn't see itself allied with local police. I mean, that's basically the last hope for Americans, is a Department of Justice that goes in and cleans up these departments. It's happening in some cases. Atlanta is under fire. The DOJ, Department of Justice, took over the Oakland Police Department. They're all over the Albuquerque Police Department. But I still worry about it because a lot of it is eyewash. Last week, when Eric Holder, the Attorney General, stood up in front of all the microphones and announced that the DOJ was going to go into Ferguson, Missouri, and do an in-depth investigation of civil rights abuses. That sounds wonderful, all aimed at stopping the killing by cops. But wait a minute, who did he cite as an example of a success case? Las Vegas Metro.
Did he really?
He did. He cited that the cops program, community-oriented policing something, had gone into Vegas, found 75 things that needed improvement, and he said, I'm proud to report that Las Vegas has completed, 90-some% of those. And I almost ran off the road saying, wait a minute. Checking off the boxes of changing the paperwork, policies, procedures, and training doctrine does not translate or has not translated yet to stopping the killing. I gave you the figures earlier, but I have since had them sent to me. 2010, 25 officer-involved shootings in Vegas, 18 in 2011, 12 in 2012. And I told you there have been 15 this year already. I don't have 2013s available. So the bottom line is, when the cops program came into Vegas and took a look around, Las Vegas cops slowed down the shooting and killing, but they didn't stop. And as soon as the cops team left and they checked off all those little boxes, what have they done? They've gone back to shooting and killing. So paperwork exercises by the DOJ and, filling out a checklist does not stop the killing. So what will? I, again, say it's going to take some serious culture change, which means we have to have better leaders. So when I was asked on an interview recently, whose fault is this? I said, it's our fault. We, the citizens. We have to stop electing those people who spend the most money in a sheriff's election. We have to stop electing county commissioners and other civic leaders just because they're backed by the local police union. If anything, that should be anathema to a voter. If the cops are backing a certain candidate, you can bet that candidate is in the tank for the police union, and they will do whatever the union wants. So you have to elect better leaders all the way around. If that happens, I suggest that good, constitutionally based sheriffs, police chiefs, and district attorneys will start working to get rid of the killer cops. I think there needs to be a nationwide campaign of rid the ranks of rogues. Get rid of these guys. If I were king and I went into a police department like Las Vegas, I would do a zero baselining. Shoot, we did it all the time in flight tests. Before you make a change to an airplane, you baseline the original airplane. You go out, you find out all of its numbers, performance numbers, stability and control, handling qualities, etc. Then you made the change to the airframe, the engine, or whatever, and you went out and tested again using the same kind of test to see what the change was. Zero baselining in a police department is similar. You go in and you give every one of your officers a deep dive psychological test. And if they show any signs of PTSD, any signs of aggressiveness above and beyond what you would expect, if they do not come up to the level of IQ that I think needs to be among our police officers, get rid of them. Get rid of them right now before they hurt or kill somebody else again. Rid the ranks of rogues. That's the first thing you do. And then you put a body camera on every single cop in the nation. And if that cop is involved in an incident where his body cam just accidentally fails, that's grounds for dismissal. You may get it one time, but you don't get two of them. Zero tolerance for that.
Yeah, cops are terrified of getting fired and losing their pension and stuff like that. That's a huge incentive.
And of course, the Las Vegas Police Protective Association has successfully resisted putting body cams on or even dash cameras in the police cruisers there for decades. They don't want it. Well, of course, they're aided and abetted by people like Sheriff Gillespie, who rolls over every single time. Whatever the union wants, Gillespie gives them, instead of pushing back on them. I would like to see every police union in the nation decertified and gotten rid of. Even Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was a real friend of unions, said public service employee unions are a bad idea. Why? Because the unions get so powerful then that they can actually get elected through the big donations, whoever is going to support the unions. So it works against the taxpayer big time. And if nothing else, what needs to happen there in Las Vegas in the near term is, and there's some great warriors there in town working on exactly this, and that is get the leadership of the PPA, Police Protective Association, off the taxpayer rolls. Right now, there's at least 8 leaders, including the top dog, Chris Collins, of the PPA there, that are paid by the taxpayer.
I had no idea.
They're getting a full salary from Metro. And what's their main job? Squeeze whatever they can out of the taxpayer through higher salaries, better benefits for cops, and get this, protect a cop no matter what he does. That's his job. So the PPA rolled in against my family and me after Erik was killed. They did their very best. They have trolls, PPA officers whose sole job is to go in to the comment section under news reports, and if it looks anywhere favorable to Erik Scott back in that day, their job is to slam whoever is saying, hey, Erik was a good guy and the cops are dirtbags. These guys intimidate online. They are the heavy hitters, the knee breakers, if you will, for the power structure there in Las Vegas. So the PPA, I think, needs to go. First order of business is get those 8 guys off the taxpayer rolls. If they're so important to the membership of the Police Protective Association, let the members cough up a little more in dues every month to pay for these very valuable people like Chris Collins, who has never missed a chance to stick his foot in his mouth and say something stupid, in my estimation.
Hey, by the way, I can testify to that fact that in the Erik Scott group on Facebook, people were being contacted by cops and intimidated in reality, you know, and we were all talking about it back at the time. There was a lot of harassment going on. And
some of us have received death threats over the years.
Right.
Taken too seriously, but it shows the mentality of the union guy. For the good, some of the good news, though, is that roughly 200, maybe over that, crowding 300 now, cops that used to be members of the Las Vegas Police Protective Association have left. They've canceled their membership. And they moved over to the Fraternal Order of Police. That's a good start. You know,
Bill, we're down to 1 minute. We're down to 1 minute, so just take it and just tell us whatever you think is most important.
I would say any cop that's involved in a use of force incident is subject to dismissal. I think cops need to be held to a higher standard. They have the right to take life, and they should be held accountable for doing so. We need laws that require outside investigations of any use of force case across the country. We as citizens say, no more cops investigating cops and reporting to cops. Done. No more.
And where can we get your book, bro? And what if people want to contact you and send you an email or a...
I would suggest they go to my website and use the contact me part, and that's www.williambscott.com, williambscott.com. I'll respond to as many as I can.
Yeah, Mr. Scott, I can't thank you enough for coming on here. You know, as a matter of fact, when I started doing this show, this is one of the issues I wanted to get on here and bring out to the public. And I want to point out to there's the end of the show, my friend. But thank you for coming on. Bill Scott is the author of The Permit. You can find the book on Amazon.com, but there's also a link on my page, the Opperman Report blog. We're going to have a Mike Blue here coming on in a couple of minutes, and he's the head of Film the Police in Portland. And he was down in Ferguson there himself. Bill, good night. I love you.
Thanks.